On September 3, 1943, Imperial Japanese Naval Ace Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, a man with 64 confirmed aerial victories, engaged a P-38 Lightning over Wewak. He knew this aircraft. He knew its weaknesses. His Mitsubishi A6M Zero was the master of the turning fight. Sakai employed his standard tactic, luring the heavy American fighter into a horizontal turn, anticipating the P-38's slow, wide roll. He prepared to reverse direction and get inside the American's turn to deliver the killing blow. But the P-38 did something impossible. It snapped into a reverse roll with a speed Sakai had never witnessed. The maneuver was so fast that the two aces nearly collided head-on. The American pilot, suddenly in a dominant position, opened fire. Sakai, one of the Empire's greatest pilots, was forced to dive away to save his own life. Japanese flight reports from the 11th Air Fleet began to fill with similar baffling encounters. The Americans were still flying the same P-38s, but the aircraft were suddenly agile. The timing was wrong. A tactic that had guaranteed victory for months was now failing, and Japanese pilots were dying. They were fighting an enemy they could see, but they were being defeated by an innovation they could not. That mystery, which baffled Japanese high command, had its origins weeks earlier in the mud and humidity of Doadarura Airfield in New Guinea. For the American 5th Air Force, July and August had been a slaughter. The P-38 Lightning, a beast at high altitude, was a coffin in a low-speed turning fight. The Zeros were too light, too nimble. American doctrine was clear. Never, ever turn with a Zero. Use speed, hit, and run. But in the chaos of combat, pilots were baited, and the results were catastrophic. The 5th Air Force lost 37 P-38s in just 6 weeks. The names of the dead piled up. Lieutenant David Chen killed on July 9th. Captain William Morrison, an 11-kill ace, shot down on August 3rd after his controls felt mushy. Lieutenant Thomas Parker, just 21 years old, killed on August 14th while his wingman, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, listened helplessly on the radio as Parker screamed his airplane wouldn't turn fast enough. The official reports all reached the same conclusion: pilot error. The pilots, the manuals insisted, were failing to follow doctrine. Technical Sergeant James McKenna didn't believe it. McKenna was a mechanic, not a pilot. He worked on the aircraft every day. He knew the pilots who died. He heard the stories from the ones who survived. They all mentioned the same thing: a lag, a delay, a mushy feeling in the controls just when they needed a crisp response. McKenna knew the P-38 intimately. He believed the problem wasn't the men, it was the machine. The issue, he was certain, was the aileron control cables. He had felt it with his own hands during maintenance. There was slack. It wasn't much, perhaps 3/8 of an inch of play, but in a dogfight, that tiny bit of slack translated to a fraction of a second delay between the pilot moving the stick and the aircraft actually rolling. It was a fraction of a second that meant death. McKenna had reported his findings to the engineering officer 2 months earlier. The officer dismissed him. The cable tension was within factory specifications. Lockheed, 7,000 miles away in California, had not authorized any changes. To modify the flight controls in the field would void the warranty and was strictly forbidden. The bureaucracy had spoken. On the evening of August 16th, Lieutenant Robert Hayes found McKenna. Hayes was 23 years old, a farm kid from Iowa. He had flown 6 combat missions and had 0 kills. He had watched his friend Thomas Parker die just 2 days prior. Hayes was terrified, and he was desperate. He asked McKenna if there was anything that could be done to make the plane roll faster. He didn't care about regulations. He just wanted a chance to live. McKenna saw a young man he knew was going to die if nothing changed. He told Hayes to come back in the morning. That night, McKenna worked alone in the quiet maintenance hangar, committing an act of mechanical heresy. He retrieved a 6-inch piece of high-tensile piano wire from a salvaged, wrecked P-38. His hands, stained with grease, bent the stiff wire into a precise Z-shape. He opened the inspection panel on Hayes's P-38, disconnected the aileron cable, and inserted his homemade, non-standard part. The Z-shaped wire acted as an inline tensioner, adding just 0.4 pounds of tension to the cable. He tested it by hand. The slack was gone. The control surface now moved instantly. The modification took 8 minutes. It violated every regulation in the Army Air Force maintenance manual. If discovered, it meant a court-martial, If it failed in the air, Hayes would crash, and McKenna would be responsible for his death. At 7:42 the next morning, August 17, 1943, McKenna watched Hayes take off. At 8:14 a.m., Hayes's flight engaged 18 Zeros. Hayes picked a target, dived, and fired. The Zero snap rolled to escape. Hayes instinctively rolled to follow. The airplane responded instantly. There was no lag, no mushiness. The P-38 felt alive in his hands. He stayed on the Zero, fired a 3-second burst, and watched it explode. It was his first kill. 3 more Zeros dived on him. Doctrine screamed to run. Hayes reversed his turn instead. The P-38 snapped around, catching the enemy pilots completely by surprise. He shot down a second Zero, then a third. The entire engagement lasted 7 minutes. At 9:03 a.m., Hayes landed, his hands shaking. He walked straight to McKenna and said just 2 words. It worked. Flying high cover, Captain Frank Mitchell had witnessed the entire fight. He couldn't believe what he saw. Hayes's P-38 was maneuvering like no lightning he had ever seen. He found McKenna later that day and demanded to know what he had done. McKenna told him the truth. Mitchell, who had lost 4 pilots from his own flight, didn't care about the risk. "Do it to my plane," he ordered. The modification spread like wildfire. It was never written down. It was passed from mechanic to mechanic, pilot to pilot. McKenna showed his friend Rodriguez. He showed Lieutenant James Watkins at Goosup. By early September, perhaps 40 P-38s in New Guinea were flying with McKenna's illegal 8-minute modification. The statistics reversed. The 2-to-1 loss ratio of July became a nearly even 1-to-1 fight in September. For the first time, P-38s were consistently winning against Zeros. The modification was eventually discovered by an inspector in October. Lockheed engineers, sent in November, confirmed McKenna's theory. The tensioner was safe, effective, and should have been part of the original design. A similar system was integrated into the new P-38J models entering production in December. James McKenna never received official credit. There was no medal, no commendation. Robert Hayes survived the war, finishing with 11 kills. Every year on August 17th, he called McKenna to thank him for saving his life. Frank Mitchell survived with 16 kills, retiring as a colonel, and told the story to every new maintenance officer he met. McKenna returned to Long Beach, California, and opened his own auto garage. In 1991, a historian tracked him down. The historian estimated that the simple piano wire fix had likely saved the lives of between 80 and 100 American pilots. When James McKenna died in 2006 at the age of 88, his obituary simply listed him as a veteran and an aircraft mechanic. It said nothing of the night he broke the rules, or how a 6-inch piece of wire changed the air war in the Pacific.